Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of flickering lanterns, shadowed alleyways, and the soft, restless hum of a city that never truly sleeps. Edo, the heart of Japan in the 18th century, is alive by day bustling with merchants, tea houses, and clattering carts, but by night, it transforms into something else entirely. You're going to wander those narrow streets under the watch of men, who keep order with nothing more than a wooden rattle and an alert gaze. And here's the twist: you probably wouldn't last an hour here. Fires, thieves, and the occasional samurai with a grudge would make sure of that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this little lantern of ours reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push through a wooden gate and step onto a narrow street in Edo. The air smells faintly of smoke and soy from a nearby tavern, but the voices that filled these lanes hours ago are gone. Now, it's all paper lanterns, glowing like warm moons above doorways, swaying in the cool night breeze. The silence isn't absolute, though there's the occasional bark of a stray dog, the creak of a shutter, and, faintly, the tapped-up tap of wooden sandals somewhere ahead. And then you see him, the first night watchman. He's not what you expected. No imposing armor, no gleaming sword, just a plain dark robe, a straw hat pulled low, and in his hand, a small paper lantern with the crest of his patrol group painted on its side. In his other hand, a pair of wooden clappers. The house. He strikes them sharply, clack, like a sound that cuts through the quiet like a polite announcement. I am here. Stay out of trouble. This was Edo's nightly rhythm. No electric lights, no police sirens. Just these men walking their routes hour after hour, keeping order with their presence alone. They were called Yuriki and Doshin if they were samurai officials, but most were common townsfolk hired as Machi Bakeshi fire watchmen or Yojimbo guards for hire. Their job wasn't glamorous, it was exhausting, sometimes deadly, and often thankless. You follow him as he moves slowly down the lane, peering into dark corners. He stops to adjust the wick in his lantern, mutters something about the wind picking up bad news for fire safety, and moves on. He passes a row of shuttered houses, each with a small wooden tag hanging outside. Those tags, they carry the names of the occupants, a practice meant to help in emergencies, or, less charmingly, to make sure no one skips town without paying debts. Historians still argue whether these watchmen were truly effective or just symbolic. You think, as you trail him past a public bathhouse. On one hand, crime rates in Edo were impressively low for such a massive city. On the other, accounts from the time complain about watchmen sleeping on the job or colluding with criminals. Maybe tonight you'll find out for yourself which is true. A sudden sound, a cat knocking over a wooden bucket, makes him whirl around, clappers ready. He exhales when he sees it's just a cat, shakes his head, and mutters something about evening demons in feline form. There's your first quirky tidbit. Edo watchmen were famously the sharp clack-clack of those wooden clappers. Hugh Shijiko's again. And this time, you notice how deliberate the rhythm is. Not too fast, not too slow. Just enough to punctuate the silence and remind anyone lurking in the shadows that the streets are not entirely theirs. You walk alongside the watchman, your sandals whispering against the packed dirt road, and ask quietly, in your head, why such a simple sound carries so much authority. The answer lies in Edo's design itself. The city was a labyrinth, a knot of narrow alleyways and crooked streets. During the day, that chaos made commerce thrive: more nooks, more shops, more bustle. But at night, it turned into a playground for thieves. The watchmen knew that sound traveled better than sight in this darkness. They had no torches blazing like in Europe's cities, no uniformed guards marching in formation. Just the Hyoshiji, their soft lanterns, and a reputation. The rattle was both reassurance and warning. Historians still argue whether these patrols were primarily for crime prevention or just psychological comfort. You remember, the common view: watchmen's presence deterred more crime than he ever physically stopped. Edo's criminals weren't stupid. They listened for the clappers. If they heard them far away, they might risk a quick theft. If the sound drew closer, they vanished like smoke. Your guide tonight pauses at an intersection. He stands in the center, holds up his lantern, and rattles 3 sharp bursts. That's a signal to other patrols nearby. Not that there's danger, but that this junction has been checked. You glance upward and spot something you didn't see before. A small wooden plaque on a pole, with carved symbols you can't quite decipher in the dim light. It marks the boundary of his patrol area. He'll never cross beyond it without an exchange ritual. Yes, an actual ritual of clappers with the next team. A dog trots past, ribs showing, tail low. The watchman tosses it a scrap of dried fish from his sleeve pocket. Keeps them friendly, he mutters, and sometimes they bark before we see trouble. That's a quirky tidbit for you. In Edo, stray dogs were practically junior members of the night watch. Not officially, of course, but many watchmen fed them to act as early warning systems. You start to notice how the city itself aids the patrol. Above certain doorways hang small bells-wind chimes that make a soft ting-ting whenever the breeze shifts. Pretty, yes, but also practical. If someone tries to slip a door open, it jingles. There's even sand scattered at certain choke points in the street. You think it's for traction, maybe, but no, it's for sound. Bare feet or soft shoes make noise on sand. Sneaky, isn't it? Your watchman lifts his clappers again and rattles twice more. This time, you hear a faint echo from far down the road, another patrol answering. There's something oddly comforting about this invisible network of humans connected by nothing but wooden clicks. But not everyone appreciated these nightly noises. Diaries from the era complain about sleepless nights thanks to those incessant clappers. Imagine trying to sleep through a summer night, hot, humid, mosquitoes everywhere, and some guy outside keeps clack-clack-clacking. You'd be tempted to throw a sandal at him. The watchman chuckles when you bring it up. Better a noisy watch than no watch, he says. Ask the folks who lost everything last winter. His tone darkens for a moment, and you realize he's talking about a burglary gone wrong, one where no patrol was near enough to respond. He doesn't say more, but you see it in his eyes. This job may look simple, but it's heavy. Every sound they make isn't, just noise it, as a promise they trying to keep. He moves on, the rhythm resuming, and you follow. Past a row of dim tea houses, past a lone figure relieving himself discreetly in the shadows, he gets a sharp clack for his trouble, and toward a wider street lined with closed merchant stalls. And there, standing under a sagging paper lantern, is another watchman waiting. They greet each other with an exchange of claps, one set short, one long, and a quick update. Quiet, just the usual, no fuss, no chatter. Then your guide moves on, and you realize something. This whole system runs on trust. No paperwork, no radios, no supervisors lurking around. Just humans relying on each other in a city of over 1 million souls, trying to keep the night from swallowing everything whole. The street narrows again, walls of wooden houses pressing in close, until the lantern light feels trapped between them. Your watchman stops beside what looks like an ordinary door in the side of a storehouse. He knocks once, then slides it open. You follow him inside, and discover one of Edo's hidden watch stations. It's not much to look at. A cramped, low-ceilinged room smelling faintly of damp straw and burnt tea. A single brazier glows in the corner, radiating enough warmth to fight the chill. Around it, 2 men sit cross-legged, one snoring softly, the other chewing on a rice ball. They glance up as you enter, nod lazily, and return to their business. This is where the city's night watch lives. When they are pacing the streets, humble Bongba guard huts scattered across Edo. Each patrol has one, usually disguised to avoid attracting thieves. Inside, there's always a brazier, a kettle, and sometimes, if the local community is generous, a jar of sake. The awake watchman offers your guide a cup of tea poured from a chipped pot. They sip in silence, letting the warmth seep in. Outside, the night continues, but in here, time feels paused. You glance around and notice a board on the wall, covered in wooden tags. Each tag marks a household in their area, flipped one way for secure and the other for needs checking. Ingenious, isn't it? No need for maps or paperwork, just wood, string, and habit. Historians still argue whether these huts were purely functional or social hubs, you think. Some accounts describe them as hangouts, where watchmen gossiped and napped more than they patrolled. Others insist they were vital nerve centers, always ready to spring into action. Tonight you see both truths, one man alert, another drooling onto his sleeve. Your guide sets down his tea and stretches. It's quiet, he mutters, half to himself, too quiet. A phrase as old as vigilance itself. He checks the clappers, adjusts his lantern, and gestures for you to follow again. But before you leave, you spot something curious in the corner, a small carved wooden fox. For luck, the chewing watchman explains. And for keeping the trickster spirits away. Superstition again, it threads through everything here. These men face not just thieves and fires, but the unknown, the unexplainable noises. The sudden gusts in still air, the shadows that seem to move when no one's there. They laugh about it in daylight, but at night, they keep charms close. Back outside, the air feels colder, the silence deeper after the hut's cocoon. The watchman's steps sound louder, his lantern glows sharper. You realize how lonely this job must be, hours of walking through darkness punctuated by brief, cramped moments of company. No wonder the huts matter so much. As you follow, you pass another hut, this one with its door ajar. Inside, you glimpse something stranger, a dice game in progress, coins clinking softly, gambling on duty, a forbidden but common indulgence. Some historians suggest these games kept morale up. Others argue they bred corruption. Either way, you can't deny the human need to break monotony. The watchman notices your glance but says nothing. He's seen it all before. So long as they answer the clappers, he murmurs, let them play. A pragmatic view, results matter more than rules when a city's safety is at stake. You leave the huts behind, moving deeper into the sleeping city. Somewhere far off, a clapper rattles. Somewhere closer, a door creaks as someone sneaks home late. The watchman hears it too. He stops, listens, then relaxes when he recognizes the pattern. Just a neighbor's latch, nothing more. But you catch a flicker of tension in his posture. reminder that peace here is always provisional, always one sound away from shattering. The night air is heavy now, carrying a faint smell of smoke from distant hearths. You trudge behind the watchman, aware that Edo is essentially a tinderbox. Most houses are built from wood and paper, and one careless spark could turn the whole city into a roaring inferno. Every alley you pass feels fragile, as if the walls could collapse in a single breath. And that's not entirely an exaggeration. The night watchmen aren't just patrolling for petty thieves, they're fire spotters, first responders in a city that can vanish in minutes. Your guide pauses at a corner and gestures toward a low wooden bucket. These aren't just buckets, they're part of the city's firefighting network. Filled with water, sand, or ash, they're stationed strategically at intersections, ready for immediate use. Watchmen carry smaller versions during their rounds, dipping and checking, ensuring each is full and the handle sturdy. There's a rhythmic ritual to it. Check, adjust, move on. One misstep, one empty bucket, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Interestingly, Edo had fire nights, planned drills where watchmen and local residents practiced response routines. People shouted, clapped, and moved in formation. Some historians still argue whether these drills were effective or mostly ceremonial, designed to impress local officials rather than prevent real disasters. You can see both sides tonight. The preparation is meticulous, yet the city's labyrinthine alleys make rapid response nearly impossible. As you round another corner, your watchman stops abruptly in a small square. A faint flicker of light dances across a wall. He narrows his eyes. "That's nothing," he mutters, but you notice his hand tighten around the clappers. Even minor shadows matter here. Any unaccounted glow could be fire or mischief. And mischief in Edo wasn't always harmless. Some fire-starting incidents were revenge, some were carelessness, and a few, according to fringe accounts, were the work of spirits. Yes, fox spirits again, mischievous or malevolent, said to enjoy chaos. You trudge past a small shrine tucked between two houses. Lanterns hang from its eaves, glowing softly. Inside, a wooden statue of a deity stares at you, and the watchman murmurs a short prayer. It's barely audible, but you catch the gist. A request for vigilance, for luck, for protection. In Edo, spiritual practice and civic duty often overlapped. Superstition wasn't a quirk, it was an essential part of survival. A sudden clatter draws your attention. A cart tipped over. No, it's just a stray dog, knocking a bucket. You chuckle, and the watchman mutters, "Better that than fire." A small joke in a dangerous city, but you feel the tension it eases. Walking further, you spot another peculiar ritual. Watchmen sprinkling a bit of ash along the street edges. The official reason? Fire prevention, to dampen embers. The less official reason? Some swear it wards off malevolent spirits who might start fires at night. Quirky, yes, but entirely in keeping with Edo's blend of practicality and superstition. The wind shifts. You smell smoke again, not from the hearths this time, but from a distant conflagration. Your watchman stiffens, lifting his lantern higher. He doesn't rush, doesn't panic. He scans the horizon, calculates distances, remembers every hydrant, bucket, and ladder he's ever used. You realize the watchman's true skill lies not in striking criminals with clappers, but in predicting disaster before it strikes. And as you follow him down the winding street, you understand why this job was as much about intuition and presence as it was about rules. The night is alive with potential threats, and the watchman moves like a guardian spirit, balancing fear and confidence with each careful step. The distant chime of a bell echoes through the alleys, soft yet commanding, and you notice how the rhythm of Edo's night depends on such small cues. These bells weren't for music, they were curfews, signals, and subtle instruments of control. As you follow the watchman, you see households hastily securing shutters, merchants locking their stalls, and lanterns being lowered. Within moments, the city transforms from a bustling hub to a near ghost town. The streets eerily empty except for your steady, measured footsteps and the occasional clatter of a stray animal. Curfew enforcement was surprisingly organized. Watchmen weren't the only ones signaling the night. Neighborhood groups, called machikata, assisted in spreading the word. Notices and placards reminded residents when to retire indoors, and the nightly bells reinforced these rules. Some historians still argue whether these curfews genuinely prevented crime or merely encouraged the illusion of order. Either way, the effect is tangible. The empty streets feel colder, quieter, and somehow more fragile under the lantern glow. You follow your guide past a merchant's house where a lamp flickers just behind the shoshi paper. The clapper rattles sharply in warning. A figure scurries to close the door, likely a worker who lost track of time. It's almost comical, watching the flurry of last-minute obedience, but the watchman's eyes remain vigilant. This is the hidden choreography of Edo. The city itself, residents included, dances to the subtle commands of night patrols. Even so, the curfews had their quirks. Some residents, especially younger ones, tried creative workarounds, slipping through side alleys, hiding in friendly shops, or relying on bribery. Your watchman chuckles at this, muttering they never learn. Fringe tales suggest some neighborhoods would fake quiet streets entirely, only to have their mischief revealed by stray dogs or squeaky shutters. The city was clever, just like its inhabitants. You notice lanterns arranged in specific patterns along major streets. Their positioning isn't random. Certain lanterns signify that this block has been checked, or that the patrol is passing through. A simple tilt, a different height, these silent signals form a language only watchmen truly understand. The system is subtle, almost invisible, yet profoundly effective. Your steps echo in a particularly wide plaza. It's devoid of people tonight, save for a lone vendor hastily packing away remnants of the day. The air smells faintly of miso and wood smoke. You feel the quiet authority of the curfew pressing in, a reminder that in Edo, discipline wasn't just enforced by humans but by the rhythm of the city itself. And yet, even under these rules, not all dangers are human. A sudden gust causes a lantern to sway dangerously near the eaves of a wooden building. Your watchman lunges, steadying it before it can spark disaster. The city sleeps, but the fire threat is never far from the mind. You begin to appreciate how curfews, clappers, and lanterns all converge into a delicate dance of order, human vigilance, and architectural luck. As you trudge further into the night, you start noticing small details, shadows stretching longer than they should, the soft crunch of sand underfoot in specific alleys, and the eerie stillness where humans should be. These nightly curfews, combined with watchman patrols, have transformed Edo into a city of patterns and whispers, a living organism controlled as much by sound as sight. As you move past another row of shuttered houses, you notice a subtle change in your guide's demeanor. The clappers are steadier, his lantern held higher. Here and there, the outlines of swords flash beneath long robes, reminding you that not all night watchmen are commoners. Some are samurai or at least retainers trained in martial arts assigned to patrol the city at night. Their presence adds weight to the wooden clappered authority, a shadow of potential violence that few dare challenge. You trudge along behind one of these armed watchmen, imagining how easy it would be to underestimate them. The robes might be simple, the lantern soft, but the steel hidden in folds, tucked into sleeves or behind sashes, speaks volumes. Samurai weren't just enforcers. They were deterrents. Historians still argue whether this mix of commoner patrols and sword-bearing retainers genuinely reduced crime, or mostly maintained appearances for city officials. Either way, it changes the way you perceive the streets. Every flickering lantern now casts shadows with a hint of menace. The duality of the patrol is fascinating. On one hand, you see the ordinary, wary men clapping their way through quiet alleys, eyes straining to spot trouble. On the other, a single samurai in the same patrol can shift the dynamic instantly, one subtle step forward, one hand brushing the hilt of a sword, and you realize the line between protection and intimidation is raised. Your guide pauses at a corner where the lantern light barely touches the ground. Samurai patrols, he whispers, aren't always for thieves. Indeed, some guards used their presence to enforce the will of the city's elite, managing disputes between merchants or keeping rowdy neighbors in check. It wasn't exactly vigilante justice, it was Edo governance in action. Quirky detail. There are accounts of samurai watching over gambling dens or brothels, not always to stop trouble but to extract fees. A wink and nod arrangement, historians debate to this day. As you continue, you pass a side alley where two samurai watchmen are conversing in hushed tones. One spins his sword lazily in the moonlight, the other laughs softly at a joke you can't hear. The scene is oddly humanizing. These aren't just symbols of authority. They're men, bored, tired, and trying to find some amusement in a long night. You wonder how many fights they've prevented with merely the suggestion of force. Meanwhile, the ordinary watchmen press forward. You notice how they step aside subtly, letting the samurai take the lead where tension might spike. It's a choreography perfected over decades. You also notice a small, almost hidden ritual. The clappers are tapped twice for ordinary streets, thrice when a samurai patrol passes by. A silent communication layer that only insiders understand. A few moments later, the samurai part ways, heading down another street. Your guide claps his wooden sticks 3 times in acknowledgement and resumes the slower, methodical pace. You start to grasp the layered protection of Edo. Ordinary men patrolling with modest tools, shadowed by those trained to wield steel, all under a system of sound, signals, and strict ritual. It's a world where perception is nearly as important as action. And as you follow him through yet another lantern-lit passage, you can't help but notice how the night changes under the watch of a sword. There's confidence here, a certain silent assertion that the city is under control, but also tension, the kind that reminds you, this isn't a game. You're in a living, breathing city where rules, weapons, and rituals all converge under flickering light. The night air carries a sharp tang of sake from a nearby tavern, and you can hear the muffled laughter and slurred voices of patrons spilling into the alleyways. Your watchman's pace slows just a touch, his eyes scanning the shadows with a mixture of patience and irritation. Drunken disturbances were among the most common challenges a patrol faced, and handling them required a skill set you wouldn't expect. Brute force could escalate a situation into violence or public scandal, so diplomacy and careful restraint were often the watchman's best tools. You follow him past a group of men wobbling down the street, kimono sleeves too loose, heads bobbing in unison with their clumsy steps. The watchman approaches silently, clappers held loosely, and speaks in a calm, measured tone. One of the drunks stumbles and mutters an apology. Another glares defiance in his eyes. Your guide tilts the head, a bamboo pole tucked under his arm. Not a weapon, exactly more of a gentle threat. The scene unfolds like theater. The drunken men scatter with minimal fuss, muttering under their breath. Fringe accounts suggest some patrols carried a small collection of peculiar tools of persuasion, like ropes to tie up repeat offenders or wooden bats used more for theatrics than harm. Historians still argue whether these methods were officially sanctioned or part of local improvisation. Either way, tonight you see a balance between authority and absurdity. The drunken brawl is quelled not with swords or arrests but with timing, posture, and a few sharp taps of clappers. A curious detail: many watchmen memorized local patrons' favorite haunts. If a brawl erupted, they could anticipate where it would flare up and intercept before serious damage occurred. It's part intuition, part human intelligence network. You can imagine the conversations over cups of tea in the hidden huts. Sokai's boy is drunk again. Corner near the bathhouse. I'll take first watch. Your guide continues, passing the quiet remnants of the incident. The street smells faintly of spilled sake and wet straw. A small fox figurine sits near a doorway again, superstition intertwining with duty. Some watchmen believe these charms help prevent accidents, including drunken mischief. Others see it as psychological reinforcement, giving them confidence when facing unpredictable humans. You notice how the rhythm of clappers changes subtly as they pass each scene. A sharp, quick pattern signals that an incident occurred. A slower, deliberate one reassures residents that the patrol is vigilant but the disturbance is contained. Residents, even if asleep, are attuned to these signals. It's an elegant, understated language of the night. And as you trudge onward, your mind starts cataloging the strange juxtaposition of Edo. Serious responsibility handled with subtle, almost playful gestures. The threat of violence mitigated by humor and cleverness, and human unpredictability managed not with force alone, but with observation, strategy, and a little bit of luck. You begin to appreciate the finesse behind each clack of wood against wood, each cautious word, and each sideways glance in the dark. The watchman pauses at an intersection where the lanterns hang unevenly, swaying with the gentle night breeze. He adjusts one slightly, and you notice a subtle, deliberate pattern. The angle, the tilt, the exact glow. This isn't just decoration, this is a coded language. Lanterns, clapper rhythms, and even the timing of pauses conveyed vital information to other patrols. You might think it's overcomplicated, but for those walking these streets nightly, it's second nature. He strikes the clappers in a distinctive rhythm, 3 short taps, followed by a pause, then a long tap. Another watchman, somewhere down the alley, responds with the same pattern, acknowledging that the patrol has passed through safely. Fringe historians argue whether these signal systems were ever sophisticated enough to relay complex information, or if they mostly served ceremonial purposes. Watching it live, though, you start to understand how crucial they were. Misread a rhythm, and a patrol might miss a disturbance or worse, walk into danger. You notice an oddity as you continue. Some lanterns are deliberately dimmed, casting shadows in corners where thieves might lurk. Others glow brighter, a warning or invitation depending on who understands the code. And while it seems almost theatrical, the system works. You get the sense that these subtle cues were both deterrent and early warning network. The watchman gestures to a small group of alleys converging ahead. This is where they usually lurk, he says, referring to petty thieves or mistmakers. The lantern signals shift accordingly, a slight lowering, a tilt toward the most vulnerable angle. It's like watching a city communicate without words, a silent choreography layered on centuries of experience. You start noticing tiny habits. A clapper tap near a corner indicates no trouble. 2 taps suggest check this house, and 3 taps, usually long, signal possible intrusion or emergency. This invisible code ensures the patrols operate cohesively, even when out of sight of each other. It's quietly brilliant. Oddly, sometimes these codes are misinterpreted, leading to comical or unexpected outcomes. One diary recounts a watchman misreading a lantern tilt and waking an entire neighborhood unnecessarily, causing sleepy merchants to groan and a few cats to panic. Your guide chuckles softly at the memory. Better wrong than too late, he says, and you realize, walking in his wake, that these signals do more than maintain order, they build trust among patrols. In a city as vast as Edo, where chaos could erupt at any moment, communication without confrontation was often the safest weapon. Every tilt of a lantern, every tap of a clapper, every pause and movement is a thread in the night's invisible web, and you're right in the middle of it, absorbing the complexity almost by osmosis. The faint chill of early morning doesn't reach the narrow streets yet, but you start noticing another layer of Edo's nighttime life. The watchman's pay, not just coins tucked into a sash, but a system of stipends, bonuses, and informal side hustles that kept the patrols running. You peer into a tiny shop as your guide pauses and see him nod at the owner. This nod isn't casual, it's an acknowledgement of payment, a quiet tip for information, or maybe a favor owed. These exchanges were common, a subtle economic web that historians still debate for their ethical implications. Officially, patrolmen earned modest sums, enough for rice, tea, and basic needs. But many had extra income streams helping merchants protect goods, occasionally taking private security jobs, or even consulting in local disputes. Fringe stories claim some earned surprisingly well by quietly overlooking minor infractions in exchange for compensation. You watch as your guide retrieves a small pouch from his sash, coins glinting in lantern. Light-handed, it's clear this wasn't just about surviving the night, but surviving Edo's complex social economy. You notice how PE influences behavior. Men who were well compensated in official channels tended to be more diligent, while those relying on side hustles sometimes looked the other way. You realize the city itself incentivized a balance between vigilance and pragmatism. It's both elegant and precarious. The watchman adjusts his lantern and continues. You see a merchant's back door slightly ajar. A quick, almost imperceptible nod passes between them. Nothing illegal, exactly just information about a suspicious figure spotted earlier. The patrol's network extends beyond alleys and streets. It's woven into the human landscape, a social fabric as much as a security system. You can't help but notice the contradictions. While coins and favors lubricate the system, they also risk corruption. Stories exist of guards taking bribes to ignore minor thefts, and some historians argue that such behavior undermined confidence in the night watch. Yet without these small exchanges, many alleys would remain perilous and the city far less orderly. Your guide pauses at another intersection, setting down his lantern. It's not glamorous, he murmurs, but it's honest work if you respect the rules. Mostly you glance at him, trying to pass the subtle humor in his voice. Even in the dead of night, the economy of Edo hums quietly alongside its vigilance, like a river running beneath the streets. And as you continue on, the juxtaposition of low wages, side hustles, and social obligations becomes clear. The watchman's life isn't just walking and clapping, it is a delicate negotiation with the city itself, a balance between duty, survival, and human temptation. You trudge down a narrow alley, the lantern casting long, flickering shadows on the paper walls. Something about this stretch feels different, tense, alive in a way the earlier streets weren't. Your guide leans in slightly, lowering the lantern. This is where the clever ones play, he mutters. By clever, he means thieves who've memorized the patterns of patrols, learned which lantern tilts signal absence, and tested the limits of clapper rhythms. Edo had its share of criminals who thrived not by brute force, but by exploiting gaps in the system. You notice the subtle signs, footprints that don't match sandal patterns, faint smudges of soot on corners, a slightly ajar door in an alley that should be locked. Your guide pauses, listens. They watch, and sometimes they profit quietly, he says. Fringe accounts suggest some patrolmen occasionally colluded with thieves, turning a blind eye in exchange for small bribes or favors. Historians still argue whether this was widespread or merely anecdotal exaggeration. Either way, tonight you see evidence of the cat-and-mouse game Edo's streets hosted. Sudden movement catches your eye, a shadow flits across the wall. The watchman strikes his clapper sharply. 3 quick taps, no response. Just a hint of wind and a cat scurrying away. Still, the threat feels real. It's a reminder that even with careful signals, careful patterns, and seasoned intuition, the night can be unpredictable. Some thieves relied on timing, moving only when a patrol had passed or using knowledge of side lantern codes to avoid detection. Others exploited distractions, drunken brawls, misfired fire signals, even superstition. You glance at a small fox figurine perched on a nearby post and wonder if the spirits are watching or if it's just another layer of human cleverness. The watchman moves with deliberate precision, covering blind spots that seem obvious now you know the system. He pauses at another junction, tapping the clappers slowly, a signal of caution, warning other patrols that this area needs extra attention. The rhythm is subtle, almost elegant, an auditory map of danger. You realize Edo's night watch isn't just about presence, it's about understanding patterns, human behavior, and psychology. Criminals are predictable only to the extent that they believe no one is watching, and the watchman makes sure someone always is. Your guide gives a small chuckle at a corner where an open window allowed a petty thief's attempt. Smart, but not smart enough, he mutters. Walking past, you start to appreciate the complexity of their world. A city where loyalty, vigilance, subtle signals, and occasional complicity weave together into a system of nocturnal order. Every alley holds lessons, every shadow a possibility, and every clapper tap is a note in Edo's symphony of survival. The city seems to stretch endlessly before you, alleys curling like ribbons under the dim glow of lanterns. You notice a subtle change. The sounds are different now. Faint murmurs, the creak of wooden shutters, even the occasional cough drift in the night air. Your guide slows, listening intently. This is where the delicate balance matters most, he whispers. By balance, he means the interplay between law, order, and human error. Even the most vigilant watchman can't control everything, yet the perception of control is as vital as actual enforcement. You trudge past a tiny tea house, doors closed and windows shuttered. The faint aroma of brewed leaves hints someone stayed late preparing for the next day. Watchmen often used these small sensory clues: smoke, smell, and subtle light changes to anticipate trouble. Fringe accounts suggest some patrols memorized the exact scent of each tea house's fires, using it to gauge whether anyone was hiding or cooking suspiciously. Historians still argue whether these details were consistent practice or embellishment. But you notice how attuned your guide is. A subtle rustle alerts him. He tilts the lantern, revealing a cat perched on a low wall. It freezes, tail flicking. Your guide whispers, "Sometimes animals see what we miss." Indeed, stray cats and dogs were unofficial night assistants. Their sudden movements often signaled intruders, fires, or other disturbances before humans could detect them. The idea of animal informants might sound whimsical, but Edo's streets were observant in every sense. The alley opens into a small square, and you see another watchman, waiting silently with clappers poised. They exchange a brief tap signal, almost imperceptible but precise. You realize this is a conversation without words. Area status, potential threats, and safe passages all conveyed in wooden taps and silence. It's choreography that would feel absurd if not so critical. Your guide gestures toward a faint glow behind a closed shutter. It's a fire lantern in a household window, slightly tilted. This subtle cue indicates someone is awake and alert, and the patrol doesn't need to investigate. Such signals reduced unnecessary interruptions, maintaining trust between residents and night watchmen. You realize how much of the night's work was communication, silent, coded, and human. You trudge past another curious feature, a set of tiny wooden stakes lined along the edge of a street. They're simple enough, yet functionally brilliant. Some historians argue whether they were primarily fire deterrents, markers for patrols, or an old superstition practiced to ward off spirits. Your guide taps one lightly with his clapper. No response, just a faint echo. He smiles. Old habits die slowly, he mutters. The streets hum with quiet purpose. Each step, each pause, each tap of the clappers is a calculated movement in a living, breathing system. You understand, perhaps for the first time, that Edo's night watch isn't just about enforcement. It's a delicate dance of perception, intuition, and centuries of accumulated wisdom. You follow your guide into a quieter district, where lanterns hang higher and alleys twist like ribbons into near-complete darkness. The air smells faintly of rice fermentation and river water, a reminder that even the densest neighborhoods are tied to daily life. Here, the night feels almost sacred, as if every step you take is observed by centuries of practice. Your guide taps his clappers deliberately, the sound sharp yet measured, echoing softly between walls. Each tap communicates more than safety. It conveys presence, vigilance, and accountability. Patrolling this district reveals the subtle hierarchy among watchmen. Some are veteran locals, deeply familiar with each alley, each resident's habits. Others are newer recruits, learning not just the city's geography but its unspoken social code. Fringe accounts describe the mentorship as ritualistic, senior watchmen guiding juniors through silent lessons in observation, intuition, and discretion. Historians still argue whether these informal systems were more effective than official training manuals. You notice the rhythm of guidance tonight. Deliberate gestures, silent nods, and occasional whispered instructions. A sudden movement by a narrow doorway catches your eye. A small figure, a child, maybe 9 or 10, peeks out, curious but cautious. The watchman waves subtly, signaling that curiosity is tolerated but boundaries remain. This speaks to the nuanced role of patrols. Authority tempered with awareness, firmness softened by human understanding. You realize the night is as much about managing relationships as enforcing laws. Passing a tiny shrine tucked between two homes, your guide pauses. He touches a wooden fox figurine perched on the shrine, muttering a soft prayer. These superstitions weren't merely quaint, they provided psychological reinforcement. Some claim fox spirits protected households, others insist the rituals were habit passed through generations. Either way, they influenced how people responded to the patrol's presence, adding an unseen layer to the city's nocturnal order. You notice the subtle interplay between light and shadow. Lanterns placed at strategic intervals illuminate key pathways but leave blind spots intentionally, creating a network where watchmen's presence is always felt but never overbearing. Oddly, some criminals misread these shadows, thinking they conceal movement, when in fact, the patrol has already accounted for them. The city itself becomes a collaborator in maintaining order. Even the smallest details matter. Sand scattered on certain streets muffles footsteps, making it easier to detect irregular movements. You watch as your guide steps deliberately over the sand, listening for anomalies. Every creak, every faint echo is a potential warning signal. The night is alive, and the watchmen are its attuned ears and eyes. And as you continue along these twisting alleys, you realize Edo's night has not merely survived, it's orchestrated a complex symphony of signals, intuition, superstition, and human judgment, all converging to preserve a fragile balance between order and chaos. You follow your guide into a part of Edo that feels almost untouched by the bustle of the day. The streets here are narrower, houses closer together, and the lantern's glow barely reaches the ground. The quiet amplifies every sound: a cat padding across a roof, the rustle of paper screens, the distant clink of a well bucket. Your guide's clappers echo softly, and you realize that in this district, silence itself is a tool. It heightens awareness, makes residents alert, and lets the watchman detect anomalies that might go unnoticed elsewhere. You notice small details you hadn't before: a lattice window slightly ajar, a faint scent of ink from someone writing late. Even the irregular spacing of roof tiles each could indicate unusual activity. Fringe accounts describe watchmen memorizing such minutiae, and some historians still argue whether this level of detail was universally applied or reserved for more alert, experienced patrols. Tonight, you witness the precision. Nothing escapes your guide's attention, no matter how trivial it seems. Passing a tiny alley, your guide gestures to a group of neatly stacked barrels. They used these as markers. He whispers, some barrels mark routes, others indicate where water is available, and occasionally, they're placeholders in a subtle game of hide-and-seek with thieves. Superstitions occasionally mix in. One wooden barrel might conceal a small talisman meant to ward off spirits. Edo's streets, you realize, are a blend of practicality, human ingenuity, and a touch of mysticism. You see another interesting ritual. The watchman inspects door latches with a faint rhythmic tapping, not heavy-handed, just enough to verify integrity. These taps communicate silently to other patrols. All secure, no disturbances detected. Residents learn to recognize this, sleeping more soundly knowing that even the faintest gestures are part of a broader protective network. The guide points to a slightly darker corner, the edges of a narrow path almost swallowed by shadow. Some risks, he murmurs, are invisible. He listens intently and shifts his lantern in a slow arc. Even minor sounds, creaking shutters, distant footfalls, wind through eaves, are scrutinized. You realize that vigilance in Edo wasn't just about clappers and lanterns. It was a heightened sensitivity to the environment, a mental map constantly updated with auditory, visual, and olfactory cues. A subtle detail strikes you: the sound of the river nearby, muted but persistent. Waterways were both lifelines and hazards, carrying goods, rumors, and occasionally miscreants. Patrols near rivers had to adjust for echoes, shifts in current, and even animal activity. It's another layer of complexity, an invisible rhythm that weaves into every step of the night watch. As you move deeper into this labyrinth, you feel how Edo's night is orchestrated through a combination of signals, subtle rituals, environmental awareness, and human intuition. Each alley, lantern, and gesture contributes to a living system where survival depends on both precision and imagination. You follow your guide into a section of Edo where the streets widen slightly, yet the shadows feel heavier, more deliberate. Here, the night carries an air of vigilance. It's quieter, but more tense. The clapper's sound resonates differently in these open areas, echoing across walls and giving your guide a broader awareness of the district. He pauses frequently, listening to the distant shuffle of footsteps, the faint scrape of a cart, and even the whisper of wind through bamboo. Every detail matters, and you begin to understand how a watchman's night is less about movement and more about observation. Passing a row of closed shops, you notice subtle markers: a bent nail, a smudge on a doorframe, a small lantern placed slightly off-center. These aren't mistakes, they're signals, warnings, or reminders from earlier patrols. Fringe historians debate whether such markers were intentional or simply habits that evolved into practical codes. Tonight, you see their utility. The smallest anomaly can mean the difference between anticipating a threat or walking blindly into one. You glimpse a small group of residents quietly tending to a late task. The watchman acknowledges them with a nod and a quiet tap of the clappers. Mutual recognition maintains trust. Residents feel monitored yet respected. This balance between authority and community is essential. Too heavy-handed an approach could erode cooperation, and Edo thrived on subtle collaboration. You notice how even minor gestures, a pause here, a tap there, maintain that fragile equilibrium. The guide pauses at a corner where lantern light barely reaches. Some nights, he murmurs, the city is a puzzle. You watch him survey the alley, mentally mapping exits, shadowed corners, and potential hazards. You realize that Edo's streets were never truly predictable. The watchman relied on experience, instinct, and occasionally a touch of luck. Superstitions, fox spirits, small charms, protective rituals still thread through these practices, blurring the line between precaution and belief. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, a cat knocking over a pot, makes the guide freeze momentarily. He listens, then relaxes, recognizing the harmless cause. Small moments like these punctuate a watchman's night, combining anxiety, humor, and vigilance. Oddly, some diaries recount that even seasoned patrols occasionally relied on intuition alone. Trusting instincts over rules, a subject still debated by scholars. Walking on, you start noticing the rhythm. Clappers, pauses, lantern adjustments, whispered communication. Each movement is intentional, a silent conversation with the city. You understand how this intricate network of signals, rituals, and human awareness maintains a fragile nocturnal order. Every step feels like part of a symphony, orchestrated through centuries of experience, practice, and intuition. By the time you reach the edge of this district, the sun is still hours away, yet the city seems poised to shift seamlessly into dawn. The watchman's rhythm slows, the clappers less insistent, as if the streets themselves are sighing in relief. You notice how a night's labor blends into the fabric of Edo, leaving a city both secure and alive, silent yet communicative, vigilant yet patient. You trudge along the last stretch of your nighttime journey, the city beginning to hint at the early, gray edges of dawn. The streets are quieter now, the occasional lantern swinging lazily, its glow weakening as morning approaches. Your guide's clappers are slower, more deliberate, signaling that the major checks are complete. There's a subtle calm to this stage of the patrol, a reflective pace that acknowledges both vigilance and survival. You realize the night watch is as much about endurance as skill, the hours stretching endlessly. Yet every tap of wood carries purpose. Passing familiar corners, you notice how much the night has revealed. The invisible rhythms, hidden signals, and subtle patterns that make Edo survivable. Every alley, every lantern, every whisper of wind played a role in a city that relied heavily on its watchmen. Fringe accounts speak of some patrols memorizing entire districts in their sleep, recalling details like where a shutter might squeak or which roof tiles shift with the wind. Historians still argue whether such extreme attentiveness was widespread or exceptional, but tonight you've witnessed the meticulous observation firsthand. The guide gestures at a distant river, where moonlight shimmers faintly on the surface. Waterways were both lifelines and hazard routes for transport, escape, or clandestine activity. Patrols paid close attention to these areas, adjusting signals and timing for reflections, echoes, and movement. Even seemingly innocuous sounds, like the plop of a paddle or the rustle of reeds, were monitored. It's a world where survival hinges on constant awareness, and you feel the weight of it, almost palpable in the air. You notice small rituals that punctuate the last hours, a whispered prayer at a shrine, a soft tap of clappers near a vulnerable corner, a glance toward a familiar lantern. These gestures are subtle but vital, reminders that order is maintained not only by enforcement but by consistent, practiced care. The night is ending, but the vigilance doesn't vanish, it transitions seamlessly into the day, ready for repetition tomorrow. And as you walk alongside your guide toward the city's edges, you reflect on the complexity of Edo's night watch. It's a system of signals, intuition, discipline, superstition, and human understanding that transforms ordinary streets into a web of subtle, life-preserving communication. You realize the true skill isn't clapping wood or wielding a sword, it's reading a city, predicting behavior, and maintaining calm authority in a world that could otherwise spiral into chaos. The night softens around you, the first birds beginning their morning calls, lanterns dim, shutters open, and the city breathes in rhythm with its inhabitants. You trudge a little slower now, absorbing the lessons, the rituals, and the quiet heroism of those who guarded Edo's fragile, flickering nocturnal world.